Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted, episode 14. Two men, webcams and all, sit down and bloviate about Anglicanism on the internet. That's George and Kevin. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today is October 17th, 2011.
George, episode 14 starts off with Today in History, and we're going to have a local, well, not really local, they're Australia. They're local time-wise. Okay, it's only been a year or two since this decision's been made, but on this date in 2010, Sydney re-voted to allow laity to perform the Eucharist. Now, there's obviously technical jargon there I'm missing, but you'll fill us in on that. In short, Sydney has, over the last 30 years, dealt with whether or not they should allow laypersons to perform Eucharist in a large setting. Now, everybody has little lay chaplaincies where you have a layperson who's part of the prayer team who's allowed to go to the nursing home and give out the Eucharist. That's done in many dioceses and provinces around the world, but to actually have somebody perform in the church service in the Eucharist, that's a little bit different. That's not something that your average bishop or clergy even says, hey, that's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on now in Sydney?
Well, the 2010 vote was to allow lay presidency and diaconal presidency of the Eucharist. And Archbishop Jensen, this was overwhelmingly supported by the diocese, and they've been working on this issue for over 30 years, doing a great deal of theological and scriptural study on this whole point. And it's not that anybody can celebrate Eucharist at any time, but a layperson with a license from the Archbishop could be the one who celebrates the Eucharist. So
right.
It's not just anybody can do anything what they want, but a licensed layperson could act as a priest. It does now.
And that's an interesting concept.
Yes, but they would argue that there's nothing in the Bible that says only priests may celebrate the Eucharist. Now, I don't want to get into the issues of whether it's right or if it's wrong, but because I think the bigger issue is how Sydney has dealt with this, because Archbishop Jensen, who supports lay presidency, has said we're not going to go ahead because the rest of the communion is not on board. We have to take in consideration the feelings and thoughts of others.
That's a great juxtaposition, because we have Sydney down under, and we have here in America up over. The Episcopal Church had something new they wanted to offer the communion. It was called homosexual Bishop Gene Robinson. And they were asked by the greater Anglican communion, hold off, we're not all on board yet, we're not sure how this is going to work. Let's really vet this out over some time. At Lambeth 110, they said, no, marriage is really between a man and a woman. We want to stick with that type of structure. And text said, so what? And so here we have Australia saying, we're going to wait until the communion really supports what we're doing and understands what we're doing, versus the Episcopal Church, who says, we're going to be the mavericks and kind of force this down the Anglican Church's throat.
Yes, it speaks really to the provincialism and small-mindedness of the leaders of the Episcopal Church. Because you hear Episcopal Church leaders say, this is a matter of justice. We must, in justice, recognize the ministry of those gays and lesbians who the Church has always said shouldn't be ministers, but now we're going to make them ministers. And they provide all this theological rationale. But in Australia, you can say, well, we have a justice issue too. We're removing people from the tyranny of the priesthood. And you can make all these sorts of justice arguments, but the point is, the Australian Church, the Sydney Church, has acted as an adult in this issue. And I don't think you can make that claim about the Episcopal Church. Kevin, I don't want you to fall out of your chair, but I'm going to say nice things about Rowan Williams, the Archbishop of Canterbury.
I'm holding on.
Rowan Williams went down to Central Africa. He went to Malawi, Zambia, and then Zimbabwe. And this visit, this last week, I think is the high point of his time as Archbishop of Canterbury. He went into the lion's den, bearded Robert Mugabe, who's a not very nice dictator,
No.
and he stood up for the persecuted people of Zimbabwe, for the Anglicans in that country. It's just a mess down there, and Rowan Williams is actually exerting moral authority. He's speaking up for the truth. He's confronting evil people. He's doing what a priest and a minister of God should do. And I'm flabbergasted.
Yes.
Now let's see. I'm just amazed.
I know. Well, all of Anglicanism has asked Archbishop Rowan Williams to stand up and take a stance on any issue that doesn't regard the Druids. And to finally see him in action and to see the success he has when he does something correctly. The Archbishop's role, is, granted, kind of undefined. But in that, each archbishop has found a definition for their role. And all of the preceding archbishops are famous for something. Rowan, up to this point, has been famous for doing nothing. He's been famous for living in ambiguity. And
I've really been disappointed about Archbishop Williams' international profile. Do you remember he went to the Sudan in the middle of the Darfur crisis, and he sat down with the president of the Sudan, and they came out and he gave a press conference, and what did Rowan Williams criticize? George Bush and Guantanamo Bay.
Yep.
There are people dying in Darfur, and I'm sure Archbishop Williams said something about that, but his big point is Guantanamo Bay.
Yep.
2007, Kevin, you and I were in Alexandria and for the primates meeting, and the primates said to Rowan Williams, do something. Send a high-level ambassador to Zimbabwe to confront this terrible bishop, Norbert Kanunga, who's been excommunicated, but with the backing of the secret police has taken over the church property and has kicked Anglicans out of their homes and churches, and do something. Well, it's 2011. Rowan Williams has done something. What is this now, 4 years later, or 3 years later?
And you understand that George and I are applauding what he did, because not only did he do something, but it was very successful. He went in there with the authority of the Archbishop of Canterbury. He said, stop stealing churches. You need to stop this horrible bishop in his tracks right now. He is not Anglican. He does not speak with the authority of the Anglican Church, and I do not recognize him. He hops on a plane, the Supreme Court takes immediate action, the President takes immediate action, and all of a sudden those wayward Anglicans who have been losing their churches are now safe because of the authority he spoke with.
Now I'm not saying that Robert Mugabe, who is an evil dictator, by the way, Robert Mugabe didn't wake up the next morning and say, gee, I'm going to turn over a new leaf because Rowan Williams has convinced me to be a nice guy. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that the visit publicized the plight of persecuted Christians in that country, both in Zimbabwe and across Africa. And a dictator was confronted by his crimes. And that's what a man of God should be doing. He should be bringing the truth to people who are breaking God's laws.
Yeah, he actually held somebody accountable. And look what happened. Now, I want to really juxtapose this, and I'm using a big word for me, juxtapose. How many syllables is that? But let's juxtapose that with what went on in America for the last 8-10 years. And here in America, we had strife. We called for the Archbishop of Rowan Williams to step in under the leadership of Frank Griswold and presiding Bishop Catherine Shorey. Ever since and before the consecration of Gene Robinson, we said the church here in North America has gone astray. They are kicking out and deposing faithful clergy and faithful bishops. Archbishop, could you fly over here and do something about it? Now, granted, he flew over here for the House of Bishops meeting in Louisiana, but he never held anybody accountable. He listened, he gave a couple speeches, had a couple press conferences, and left. he had a representative show up for the General Convention 2006. I guess it was, did Kiernan come in for that?
And John Santama was there too,
Okay.
the Archbishop of York.
And so they came in for that. And so he sent emissaries and stuff like that, but he has never sat down. Here's the equivalent of what he did in Zimbabwe. If he flew into New York, went to 2nd Avenue, 815, went up to the 3rd floor and sat down with Frank Griswold or Catherine Jefferts Short, who's ever the presiding bishop at the time, and said, listen, you guys are way off base. If you don't stop, I understand you're dealing and trying to fet out whether or not there should be gay clergy and stuff like that. I understand that. But until you stop forcing this and going forward, I'm going to go up north to Pittsburgh and recognize the ACNA as the official Anglican entity of America. I think the whole ballgame would have changed.
I don't even think we'd have an ACNA. I think that the Episcopal Church would not have had this. The AMIA was already out there. They came in 2000. But Cana and Pittsburgh and Fort Worth and San Joaquin and Quincy and now South Carolina, all of these breaks and potential breaks would not have taken place if the Archbishop of Canterbury had exercised moral leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And he hasn't. But he's done it in Zimbabwe, and God bless him for that.
Yeah, and we both pray he learns that his leadership works, that when he does the right thing, good things happen. Mm-hmm. When he sits and tries to enjoy this listening process, where all you do is listen, there is no answers in that. All there are is more questions. And for a person who went to theology and got his degree, you should be able to know a couple answers to the questions. And especially, he's a graduate of Oxford, right?
Yes.
Oh, well.
But
Oxford doesn't admit it.
Oh, no. They're very proud of him. And he is a very good theologian. But right. I don't think he's a very good archbishop. No. One thing, for people who want to really understand Archbishop Williams' theology, you should read Charles Raven's book that came out.
Oh, sure.
And because that really does lay out the fact that this whole crisis in Anglicanism is intimately tied with Archbishop Williams' theology of not being able to come to truth.
Okay, George, we're going to talk quickly about the Church of Ireland. The Church of Ireland is Anglican, in case any of our viewers didn't know that. And they're going through something that a couple other provinces have gone through before, but they recently discovered they have a dean of the cathedral who is homosexual, which was not the big deal. The big deal was he got married to his partner. And that kind of caught everybody off guard, except we learned his boss knew about it, got a letter about it, and is slowly coming forward with more and more information about what he knew, when he knew it. It's kind of this Bill Clinton thing, you know. Mm-hmm. Well, it depends what you mean by sex. Oops. But what's interesting is Ireland is not just one big homogeneous country. There's a north and a south, and they have all these interrelations of who they are. The north is conservative, the south is worse than London. So, but why don't you give us a little more background here, George? Well,
as you said, this problem was caused by Dean Tom Gordon of, it's one of these Irish words, I don't know how, it doesn't sound like it's spelled. Laughlin, Laughlin, Lachlan, in the far south of Ireland.
We got 4 emails last time correcting our pronunciation, so we have an Irish audience.
Dean Tom Gordon, his civil partnership, a gay civil partnership, was solemnized in the Republic of Ireland in the south. And his bishop, Michael Burrows of Cashel and Ossory, knew about it in advance and said nothing and did nothing and gave his tacit approval. And we've recently found out the Archbishop of Ireland, Alan Harper, knew that this was going to take place, but he didn't know who, he didn't know when, he didn't know where, and he didn't know how. He just knew something bad was going to happen before it happened. Well, this past week, the Evangelical Fellowship of the Irish Clergy, which is the conservative group within the Irish clergy, met outside Belfast and Portadown in the north, in Ulster, which is part of the United Kingdom. And Wallace Ben, a bishop of the Church of England, was there to lead a Bible study, and an Irish bishop was also there. And this group, and about 10% of all the Irish clergy were at this meeting, by the way. That's like in the Episcopal Church having 2,000 clergy at a meeting.
Yes.
We're there, and they said, look, this is a game changer, a deal breaker, however you want to say it. If we go down the road the Episcopal Church is going, we're not following you guys. So they didn't say they'd break away, they didn't call for new bishops, but they just said, look, don't go this place. And the Irish bishops held an emergency meeting to decide what to do about it, and guess what they're going to do? Hold a conference and talk.
Oh no, so they are going the way of the Episcopal Church by default.
Yeah, well, and this conference that they've got planned for next spring, I think it's March or April, they've also already said that, well, we don't want to make any hard decisions at this conference that we're going to have. So
how did they get Lambert to plan the conference for them?
In 1983, a civil war reignited between northern and southern Sudan. 2 million southern Sudanese were killed. 27,000 children reached refugee camps in Ethiopia. And they are the lost boys of Sudan. Driven from Ethiopia by rebel forces in 1991, the children fled to a refugee camp in Kenya. During their one-year march to Kenya, they faced starvation, military assaults, animal attacks, and diseases. Less than 6,000 survived.
To begin with, the lost boys, the young people who have left home, not because they want to leave, but because they were to run away, not to be enslaved or to be killed.
Right.
We walk a long walk to Ethiopia and back to Sudan and to Kenya. We lived in Kenya for 9 years before we were given a chance to come to America by the U.S. government to settle for the new life, going to school and start a new life.
Let's give the American viewers, the world viewers of Anglican TV some perspective. When you say you were forced to walk, we're not talking 5 miles or 10 miles. This was over a course of a long period of time. You had to walk about 1,000 miles.
Yes. We have to walk over 1,000 miles. Many people have died because we have no food or medicine or water.
Right.
Some are eaten by wild animals. And some drowned in the rivers and eaten by crocodiles. It was not a simple walk. But God is amazing. God saved some of other life to be witness of what happened.
And you were not just witnesses of the walk, but tell me why you left. What were you fleeing from?
I fled from my hometown, Awil, in South Sudan. And we were being targeted, especially the young people, by the Islamic movement, Islamic government, who agreed with some of the Muslim communities to come to South to kill and to take young boys and young girls for slavery to work for them.
Right.
So I have to run away.
Right.
Many of our brothers and sisters were taken for slavery.
Right. And you actually had family members that were killed.
My mother died, and brothers and sisters, and many others from our community and South Sudan. You know, if somebody refuses you to eat and to drink, refuse you access to basic thing, that person kill you.
That's right.
A killing cannot only be a gun point. You cannot be shot by gun, but you can be killed when somebody deny you a living.
How many lost boys were killed?
Many.
Yeah.
Many.
Thousands.
The war were very worse on the young people, children, and the women.
You were about 9 years old when you left your home?
Well, if my father can know when I was born,
Right,
I'm one of the people who don't know when I was born.
right.
Yes.
Were there younger lost boys than you?
Yes, there's some who are 5. Yes.
So that was, obviously a very tragic time for Sudan. Sudan now has chosen to split in two. Is this the best choice going forward, to divide the North and the South and just keep the South free? Or in your judgment, is there a better course forward, or is this the right course to take?
Well, after a long fight of more than 50 years, and when Bashir or the government in the North failed completely to make a unity attractive, the best solution was to divide the country into two. But that still gives us a lot of pain when we see our friends and brothers from North who have stood with us, people from Nuba Mountains. We don't want them to be in that situation. People in Abyei and even in Darfur, all the innocent people, black African, it was not our wish to leave them where they are now.
Mm-hmm.
But there was no solution. Our prayers is that one day they will be free, like the way we free.
Mm-hmm. And now that, we can't call South Sudan safe. There's still a lot of struggle going on in South Sudan. How is South Sudan ministering to Northern Sudan now?
We became a newest nation, but we still have a lot of war going on.
Yeah.
A South cannot be free when the war is going on in Abyei, which is actually part of my diocese.
That's,
We cannot be free when the war is still going on in Darfur and in Nuba Mountain and Augusta, Blue Nile. This means the development we've been yearning for will not come to exist because of the war going on. So on the borders in the south, there's still a lot of war going on in the borders. And even we don't know what's going to happen, because even today we don't have, the borders between the north and the south. We don't have a border.
yeah. Well, Sudan has struggled for many things. For a long, long time, you've had no government. You've been run by groups and individuals, militias, we call them here in America. Is there more of a government structure now with South Sudan?
Well, even in the old Sudan, there was a government. The problem with it was a government who did not care
That's right.
for his own or for her own people. In southern Sudan, yes, we have a government structures. We have a national government, we have state government, we have county government, and going down. Our hope is that the government of southern Sudan will be the government for the people, will be the government who care for her people, will be a government who bring development to her own people. These were the services we did not get from the whole Sudan government.
Right. Does the South Sudan government care about its people?
Yes, they do,
Good.
very much. The problem is the northern Sudan government is still disturbing us. They cause all this fight in Abyei, in Nuba Mountain, in Darfur, and even in the borders. so that to challenge the newborn country,
That's right.
not to stable. But we are not going to give them a chance. We are going to work hard to be the people who we believe we are.
Do you hope one day that North Sudan and South Sudan can join again in freedom once this conflict is over?
Join again to be one country?
Yeah?
No.
No.
It will not be possible, but we would love to work as a neighbors,
Good.
as friend countries. Allowed business people to travel, allowed people to, go to Northern Sudan, come to South Sudan. If they want to live there, they can live there. But the good news is, even though politically we are divided, spiritually we are not divided. Even up to today, my own Archbishop is the Archbishop of the South and in the Northern Sudan. We still one church. We still Episcopal Church of Sudan. We have not changed. Maybe we are going to change later on, I don't know. But we are still working together as one team. And that's the hope we have in Sudan. And that's the hope we want to see, that the government, the two countries, can have a close relationship.
Tell me about the church now in Sudan. Last I heard, it was a growing church, that you're more people are going to church, that you're bringing people to Christ. Is that still the case after the Civil War?
Yes, we are very busy. Many people are turning their life to Christ every day. We are the fastest growing church in the world today. But that comes with a lot of challenges. The church have no resources to take care of her people. We are not like in a Western world or in America, whereby people are rich, they work and they have money, and they see nothing important for them to go to church. But in Sudan, people have nothing, so they come to church, hoping that the church will provide their needs. The church will provide education, health care, clean water, all this. But we are the church with nothing in our hand now.
That's right.
But we believe strongly that our God is a rich God, and He will open the door of heaven so that the church will continue to bring His love and His care to His people in Sudan.
Yeah, one of the things that people who watch Anglican TV probably don't understand is the poverty. A average Sudanese child does not get an education. Most do not have access to clean water. They live in villages and other places where these things are not available. How can the people who watch Anglican TV help? Is there a place they can go to give money to and help support the Church of Sudan?
Yes, many places they can send money direct to our province and indicate this is for such a thing, for education, for health care, for clean water, for all this, for the church building. We need church building.
That's right.
We've been worship our God under the tree. It is time now. We are the newest nation in the world. It is time now to build our churches. It is a time now to bring the development. It's time to send our priests and the laity to school, to study theology, to learn more, to have other skills, like counseling. Most of our people have been traumatized by war. They need help. So they can give money to our province, they can give money to the diocese. If they want, we have a bank account where they can wire money. They have other friends in the West where they can send money to. And the money still come to us. Actually, we need help right now.
That's right.
We need to change the way we've been living. And, the development cannot come until when people themselves are being developed. If you develop the people, providing them with education, people will bring development.
How did Abraham come to Christ?
It was when I left home I'm not Christian, either my family were Christian. But with a long walk and seeing people die, I was having a question in my mind: if people die like this, people suffer like this, then what is the meaning of life? And when I became a Christian, I became to know that the meaning of life was what Jesus Christ endured on the cross for us. And I was converted to be Christian in Ethiopia.
George, we're going to do some more earthquake news. No, we haven't had a recent earthquake, but we're going to talk about the National Cathedral /shrine/mosque. It's kind of the place where we hold all the events spiritual here in America. It's been damaged by the earthquake we had, and every week we learn a little bit more news as they try to figure out how we're going to rebuild portions that have been damaged. And the most recent report is a minimum of $25 million to fix it.
Do you have your checkbook on you?
I'm just going to use
my wife's
I'm going to use
in her
my
purse.
PayPal account here, and we'll get them some dough. But here's the oh, you see my new iPhone 4S? Ooh, little advertising. Steve Jobs wouldn't give to the cathedral either. The problem here is they don't have a real way to ask like a diocese for money because they're a separate entity. The Episcopalians, in theory, operate the church or have worship service in it, but they don't belong to the Diocese of Washington. Mm-hmm. So they can't call up the bishop and say, send us some money or let's do some joint fundraising. And the Diocese of Washington would say, well, we spent all our money trying to defend our church. So what are they going to do, George?
They've got to reach out to the country as a whole and raise money, and it's going to take years.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, to reach out to Episcopalians at this stage in the church's life, I think is a thankless task.
No, they're in a very difficult situation because they are identified as Episcopalian. Second, we're in a recession. Third, the church doesn't really see a need right now for a national cathedral that doesn't represent Christendom.
And also, even within the Episcopal Church's own wars, that the National Cathedral has been sort of on the cutting edge of kookiness. Mm-hmm. For every beautiful ceremony, I mean, Ronald Reagan's funeral was one of the most lovely, beautiful, it was wonderful. It made you proud to be an Episcopalian to see that service.
Okay.
For every one of those, they've got some kooky Buddhist imam, Buddhist nun or imam or a witch or whatever, waving burning sagebrush leaves. And so, in other words, there's no real constituency for the National Cathedral. In other words, conservatives or liberals or the people with money, they're not going to be able to reach out and get people to write checks for $25. They've got to find somebody who's going to give them $10 million.
Yeah, and in reality, there are people that can do it, but I just don't think in this climate, in a recession and with the war of the church, that they're going to be able to raise that money. And you got to think, what's going to happen if they remain closed for 5 years? Do they somehow become irrelevant? Do they just shut down and have 3 or 4 fundraisers employed and that's it? I understand they have an endowment.
The endowment, yes, they have an endowment, but they can't really go into that. They can go into the income from it, but I can't tell you exactly what they can and can't do. But they certainly can't do this from their endowment. They've got to find new money, fresh money, because they need the endowment to keep the lights on, let alone fix the gargoyles that are falling off.
You see that guy in the other end of the camera? That's Alan Haley. He's the legal expert for all things Anglican, and he's visiting with AnglicanTV remotely from his home in Northern California. How are you doing today?
Just fine, thank you. It's a quiet Sunday.
It's a quiet Sunday, but it's been a busy legal week, hasn't it?
Very.
Yeah, I kind of get a chance here to talk about some of this stuff. It's interesting because just about the time I say I need to ask Alan about this, there's a big blog post by you about 16 paragraphs long with every question I would answer or wanted answered. So it's kind of, you're right on top of things, and I think the name curmudgeon really goes far. So let's talk about what's happened here in the last week. Basically, there's a game of chess going on, and every time we turn around, tech has changed all the pieces on the board.
Exactly.
We have a person called Judith Hicks who is or is not on this board of, what's going on?
We have to take them at their word. She was not actually designated. There's only 2 people in the whole church who determine the membership of that disciplinary board for bishops. The presiding bishop appoints the bishop members, and there are 10 of them. And then the president of the House of Deputies, Bonnie Anderson, appoints the lay and clergy members. There's 4 clergy and 4 lay members, so a total of 18. And they did their appointments back before July 1, which is when the committee started business. They announced it in a story of ENS, and Mrs. Hicks' name was not, at that time, one of the people announced as being a member. So what happened was sometime later, her name showed up on the roster of the disciplinary board posted on the official Episcopal Church website. And it showed her as a member from Province 4 with a term expiring in 2015, like all these other members. And then, lo and behold, she writes this letter as church attorney to the board. Now, the canons, that both the new canons and the old canons, make it clear that the church attorney is a special position and an advisory position who cannot participate in the voting of actual validity of charges and so on. They simply advise the body on that. So it would be impossible for Mrs. Hicks to serve both as a member of the board, a voting member of the disciplinary board, and its church attorney. And there was a lot of brouhaha raised over that. And of course, Bishop Lawrence's own chancellor, Wade Logan, caught that and wrote back to her and said, which role are you doing here? And before the answer to that could be received, they realized that they had some real problems, particularly in light of Mrs. Hicks had expressed her views quite strongly back in 2007 in responding to Bishop Wantland and 4 other bishops who put a query to the Executive Council about all the litigation. And she had expressed a lot of views back then which are at issue with the complaint against Bishop Lawrence. So she would have been completely compromised by the expression of her prior views. The official reason she gave for recusing herself was that there were conflicts with her own law firm in South Carolina. And that's entirely possible because a lot of prominent churches in the Diocese of South Carolina, and they could have some members of the law firm serving in positions on those churches. We don't know. Anyway, she had to recuse herself, and it was a very embarrassing thing for Bishop Henderson and his disciplinary board.
Yeah, it's kind of strange. I got to say that based on names, combining Finkel and Hicks in one law firm would be incredible.
Well, her law firm is Parker Poe, which is one of the bigger law firms in the Southeast. And she actually practices in North Carolina. So they're going to keep using her for other board matters, but not for this one with Bishop Lawrence. And that's going to set them back a bit because they haven't gotten an answer to their inquiry. And they're going to have to go through the motions of hiring another church attorney, and we'll see from that just how determined they are to go forward with these very flimsy charges.
Well, that brings up a bigger point that I want to talk to you about. In reality, Catherine Jefferts Schori, the House of Bishops, they can do whatever they want regardless of the canons, because nobody really can hold them accountable.
And they frequently do so, right?
Yeah, if they don't want to follow the canons, they don't have to. If they want to adjust how a canon is interpreted, which they've done in the past, they can do so. And, we've deposed, 200 clergy, many bishops, and, I don't see them at all sticking to the canons.
The new ones or the old ones, it didn't matter.
Yeah,
when
it
the
doesn't
old ones were in
matter.
effect, she broke those too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the depositions of Cox and Schofield and Duncan all were in express violation of the canonical procedures, and they just rolled forward because none of those bishops really, disputed the result, which was they were leaving the church anyway. But the big difference we have now is the Bishop Lawrence insists that he's not leaving the church. And he hasn't, the diocese has removed its succession clause to the canons, but it has not removed its succession clause to the Constitution. Mm-hmm. And so it's simply making a judgment for its purposes, in its borders, in the diocese. The new canons that were enacted by General Convention in 2009, Title IV, were unconstitutional and not within the power of General Convention to pass. And so there is no high judicial court in the Episcopal Church that can resolve that dispute. Jeffrey Shorey says that she's acting under these new canons. She considers them constitutional. Bishop Lawrence says, no, they're not. We don't recognize your authority on that, and we have a genuine constitutional crisis. Now, an ordinary organization trying to present a Christian face to the world would not allow itself to get into this kind of a crisis. It would not see it as a power struggle between two bishops over their jurisdiction and all that. And yet that's what this is being turned into. And it's blatant and it's open. And it's as though we don't care what you think or what you say. We're just going to go ahead and do this.
Well, and that's what we reached, is we reached a quagmire, a legal quagmire, because we can't go to the civil courts and ask for help.
Now, these questions of who's a proper bishop of a diocese are the quintessentially ecclesiastical questions that civil courts can't touch because of the First Amendment. It involves they're going in and deciding about the canons and the procedures and the validity of it all. Now, at one point, they might have done so, I think back with the Serbian Orthodox Church case in the Supreme Court, but that was back in the 70s. And since then, there have been a whole lot of more lower court cases, particularly in San Joaquin, where the appellate court said flat out, who's the proper bishop of San Joaquin? These courts cannot decide this question. That's a quintessentially ecclesiastical question.
So, how do you, and we're going to get around about to this because it's interesting. In your judgment, and you're not a judge, you're just a lawyer.
That's right.
Obviously a very good lawyer. But in your judgment, who has broken more canons, the presiding bishop or Mark Lawrence?
Oh, without question, hands down. I've got a whole page on my blog where I collect all the posts on her canonical violations. I think it's up past 100 and counting.
Okay. So then comes the question, how do we depose a presiding bishop?
Okay, there are procedures, and I've got a couple of posts up on that too, because I think, it's about time that somebody looked into holding her accountable for this, and there are procedures to do so when a person regularly breaks the canons like this. And it would start with a complaint under the new disciplinary canons, because that's what they recognize at the national level. So anybody could make a complaint. It used to be you had to be 10 people, including so many from the bishop's own diocese and so on. Well, that's out the window. Now anybody can make a complaint, and it goes to the intake officer, Bishop Clayton Matthews. And then there's a reference panel that's appointed consisting of Bishop Matthews, and then the president of the disciplinary board, Dorsey Henderson, and then the third person is what's called the diocesan bishop for bishops, who normally would be the presiding bishop. But when she's the subject of an accusation or charges herself, she has to step down from that, and in her place it would be Bishop Wolf of Kansas, the vice president of the House of Bishops, who would step in and fulfill that role. And the three of them would get together, look at the charges against her, and decide what to do about them. They could inhibit her. They could refer them to a panel for further investigation. And, later on an inhibition could come out and say, no, you can't do this on these canons. Well, can this happen with Dorsey Henderson and Bishop Wolf? You be the person.
It's sad. Go back to point one. the quagmire that goes on in the church.
This is as I say, this is a deliberate crisis of their own making. They want to provoke this fight. They're bringing it on, and they're going to have it. And it's not going to be pleasant for anyone.
Now, we saw a response after the clergy meeting in the Diocese of South Carolina. Bishop Lawrence met with everybody who's ordained in his diocese, and they talked us through, but they really didn't come to any good decisions or conclusions.
Well, it's really kind of, first of all, Episcopal churches, as you say, now has to go back to square one, start over again to get their charges rolling again. So they've got some breathing time to plan, and they don't have to respond really until something formal once again is directed their way. And then I assume that the response will be, no, we don't recognize your authority or your inquiry, so we're not going to cooperate with it. And then the disciplinary board will go through the motions saying, okay, well, we'll make up our own mind based on our own sources and send the charges on to Jeffrey Shorey, and then there we will be with the House of Bishops meeting next March of 2012. That's going to probably be where the showdown takes place. Right. And at that point, the bishops are going to be called upon to say, look, do you want to continue these kangaroo proceedings against one of your own sitting bishops who has said he's not going anywhere? Do you want to stand up to this leadership, or are you just going to rubber stamp and go along with this uncanonical, highly irregular and unlawful procedures?
Well, that brings up the point now. We probably put the spark in a lot of people's eyes. Wait, we can depose the presiding bishop? Yes, you can. Am I allowed to put your email address down here if they want to contact you about how to do that? Are you willing to? Well,
no, I am disqualified from taking part in any such kind of proceeding.
That's right, because you do the
I'm going to be already in a proceeding against the Episcopal Church, so I'm not allowed to do anything like bring complaints or charges or anything like that. But I am allowed to spread information, and the information is all up there in the blog. Now, bear in mind, it's going to take, be interesting. If they followed their own rules about deposing bishops, they would never be able to depose any bishop.
That's right.
There's supposed to be a majority of all bishops entitled to vote, and that includes all the retired bishops. Yeah. And there's over 300 bishops in the House of Bishops, so it should take a majority of about 151 or so to depose any bishop in the church. And the House of Bishops at its meetings, the most it ever has there is about 110, 120 bishops total.
Yeah.
So they can't even make the majority, even if every one of them voted yes. But they ignore that and just count, we'll just count the majority of the bishops present and voting, which is totally contrary to what the Constitution says.
It's kind of our catch-22.
As long as they ignore the canons and be lawless like this, it's going to be a lawless atmosphere, and there's no predicting the outcome.
Episode 14 is all done, George. Although there's some noise in the background, there's somebody packing bags, but people can contact us at Facebook.com/AnglicanTV. You can send us an email at AnglicanUnscripted@gmail.com. There's lots of ways to contact us, but why would they want to contact us, George?
Well, some people have contacted us to correct us on pronunciation and grammar and factual errors. But also, apart from grammar, pronunciation, and errors of fact, do let us know the stories that are important to you and the things that are happening out there in the wider church world, because we want to touch upon them. We want to be able to bring that full vision of what the church is about to you.
All right, we'll see you for episode 15. Thank you, George.